Good evening, everybody. This is Cinnamon Noir.
And this is the Ramen Chum.
Welcome back to Fez. So in our first little prologue for this, we just got to the main area of the game.
Uh-huh.
This is the first proper area of content. Fez has kind of a big world, but most of it is contained within one large map.
Nice.
There's no big shifts in the area or anything like that. But it can sometimes be hard to get around, which is one reason there are a lot of shortcuts in this game that you discover as you go through it. This starting area we're in, I don't really know what to call it, maybe like the ocean area, because a lot of the areas have water underneath them.
Ah.
One of the major landmarks is this lighthouse, which we could see from the distance from the first room. I don't know if you've noticed this, but when you are about to travel through a door in Fez, you can see in the distance what's on the other side of the door.
Interesting.
Kind of a useful way to have landmarks early on so you know where you're going. Fez is a game that it's easy to get lost in. Honestly, the map's not too helpful in Fez. I think the landmarks are more useful. So we're just heading around here. That door, the iron door you see, has a key. I should say. There's a keyhole. When we get a key, we can go through that door. The keys in this game are all generic, like in the original Legend of Zelda. You can use one to go through any door. Yeah, it's an interesting choice. The game sort of lets you choose your pace of unlocking stuff. Fez is an extremely open-ended game. Probably the most open-ended game that I really enjoy. There's no set structure for how you go through levels, and there are no upgrades, so it's not like a Metroidvania at all. There's no locking off of content. The only real question as to whether you can get through an area is, have you solved the puzzle that leads to the door yet? You've probably already noticed, or maybe the audience has, that several of the doors we've gone through so far have had those little wooden doors in front of them.
Uh-huh.
That's sort of to tell you where you've been in before and where you haven't. So if you haven't been through, you'll see the wooden door, and that'll give you some useful pushing if you're having trouble remembering where you went. Kind of like a maze thing. Oh, and our little friend points out that this is a warp gate. I originally thought that these things only took you back to the last gate, but it turns out you can actually use these things to teleport once you've unlocked 2 of them or more.
Interesting.
Yeah, I didn't realize it had a warp system at first, but it does. We're going to start by climbing up the tree. We're basically, from the perspective of the map, heading straight north, or up right now. Which is probably as good a way to start as any. A lot of animals in this section of Fez. Was that you taking a drink or getting
Water.
physically pained by the boredom so far?
No, the former.
Anyway, so, yeah, one of the first areas we see in the animal area is this cabin. We actually collected a key on the way here, so we're going to open this door. And this is a glitch, I'm pretty sure. I do not think this is at all intentional.
What the fuck?
It is just barely possible that this was intentional, but I don't think it was. Fez is a weird game because it has a lot of mechanics that seem kind of like glitches, and then other things which are just glitches. Fez is a bit of a glitchy game. Maybe it's my computer, but I don't know. Fez came out a long time ago, so I don't think it is my computer. Anyway, here's a mechanic that is actually unique to this one room, as far as I can tell. These disappearing blocks.
Well, I was gonna say, a game coming out a long time ago doesn't necessarily mean it'll run better on modern computers.
Yeah, but my computer isn't modern, that's sort of my point. Is I don't think that the problem is a lack of specifications, or whatever that is. No, the thing is, Fez has been kind of glitchy for me. In some playing that I did after the recording was over, I actually managed to crash it. But that was by doing some weird things.
That would be a good example of a genuine glitch.
By the way, did you notice what happened when we went through that little doorway?
I'm not sure that I did.
So there's 2 types of doorways in Fez. One is a doorway that leads to a new room, and the other is that kind which is just leading you through a whole inner room. And so what that one does is instead of going through to a new door, you actually flip the whole map around 180 degrees. Since you can't do that normally, that helps you get to areas you sometimes can't otherwise. And it's a set-piece mechanic. Huh?
Have I mentioned that I'm really glad this is you playing this game?
Oh, yeah.
I feel like I would get horribly disoriented playing this.
Even with me, we get a little lost and suffer some lost time.
You know,
anyway...
looking at that...
What?
That lightning effect.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's what was supposed to be happening in the last room? No,
I don't. I think it was just a glitch. Because the lightning doesn't happen in the forest area.
No, I mean, I know it was a glitch. Okay.
No, I mean...
if it doesn't happen there either.
No, it doesn't.
Like,
Here's
I
one
can
of the
see how a lightning effect gone wrong could produce that.
Maybe. I don't know. You'd think it would be flashing, though, whereas it was all straight black.
True.
Anyhow, this is one of the first areas that players are likely to discover by fooling around. You do it by going in that cabin, and then as soon as you head back out again, you'll come here, even if you weren't intending to. Basically, every time you travel into that cabin and back out, you will travel between two different stages of it. This sort of lightning area with all the skulls and stuff like that is part of it. So this is a curious little thing, this owl. If you read up on the lore of Fez, you'll discover that owls are sort of deities in this universe. Like in the real world, they represent wisdom. But there's some implication in this universe that they are sentient. Anyway, you cannot escape this thing's gaze. It will turn to face you no matter where you are. Which is another sign of its intelligence, because like now our hero and that cube from the beginning, it's aware that there are multiple dimensions. And all the square buddy says is, owls creep me out. Boy, I really pushed this past the point of it being interesting.
That's
I don't know why. I was trying to see, I think, if there was some kind of mechanic associated with this. I thought there was a puzzle. And there might be, and I might just be too dense to find it. I will admit there are a few things in this game that I looked up, but I did not look that up.
I was going to say it might be worth, for something that's taking you a while to figure out, it might be worth just going online.
Well, for stuff that's particularly egregious in this Let's Play, I have done some primitive editing. First time I ever did any. By the way, have you noticed something that's happening every time the lightning flashes here?
I don't think I've noticed anything that isn't obvious. Why?
There are platforms that are appearing against the dark sky.
Oh,
every time the lightning flashes. Did you just notice them? Yeah, you might be wondering, how do we get up?
Bad at this?
How do we get up this tower? And the answer is you use those invisible platforms. Or perhaps I should say semi-visible platforms.
And they are, that's what I was going to ask, so are they still there?
Yeah, they are. You don't need to wait for the lightning. Actually, there are two ways you can tell that that they're there. One of which is easier when you're playing it and it's on a big screen. You may notice if you're looking hard at the rain, that the rain spatters on those platforms, giving away the fact that they're there. Oh, and we found a second warp gate, so now if we want to, we can warp back to the first one we found.
You know what
But we're not nearly done with this area. What?
It's just occurring to me. And you mentioned this earlier that I could try Braid as one of the games we do Let's Plays on.
Yeah, why not? As long as we're playing out-of-date indie games from 5 years ago. Why not play one from 10 years ago? This game does have one major thing in common with Braid, which is that all of the little areas revolve around a single unique mechanic that's tied into the major mechanic that you have. So in Braid, in all the areas you have the time mechanic, but it works differently. Here you always have the dimension shifting mechanic. In fact, if these were like Pokemon games, Fez would be like Pokemon Space, and Braid would be like Pokemon Time. To use an incredibly geeky analogy.
Pokemon Space version. You know,
actually, isn't Giratina supposed to be the space-time Pokemon? I think it is.
I guess
there's a connection there.
But what would the inevitable expansions be called?
Oof boy. We're getting into some non-Euclidean geometry here, I don't know.
Pokemon...
Super String.
Pokemon Dead
Pokemon
Space?
Super String. Pokemon Dead Space, no. Pokemon Wormhole.
No, I mean, like, you know how there were Fire Red and Leaf Green, right?
Oh, you mean the remakes. I thought you meant, like,
Yeah.
the third one that they always have. The
When they
remakes. Ooh,
inevitably
that would be
remake
tough.
them. But that's actually a good point. Space, time, and something else. I don't know.
I will type it into Google and see what we find, since not much is happening right now.
Reasonable.
Space, time, and... Nope, just comes up with space, time. Maybe if I put in a comma. Nope. Google does not recognize commas. Anyway, let's just head on to the next area.
Let's do... I mean, the first thing that came to mind is in Doctor Who that TARDIS is time and relative dimension in space.
Mm-hmm.
But, again, that's only two...
So before we saw the owl doing this, but now this giant skull is doing it too, which is a little disturbing. I originally thought that I could just, break it, like make it snap its own neck, but it won't do that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to collect these little yellow orbs first. This game is set out in kind of an interesting way. In every room, it's kind of expected that you will get the yellow orbs first, and that encourages you to see the whole room. And then you'll start solving puzzles. The simplest way to get squares in this game is to collect the little yellow mini squares. Mm-hmm. Mini cubes, I should say. And the harder one is to solve platforming challenges and things like that. There's also further steps beyond that which lead to even harder cubes. But we'll see that later.
Yeah.
So for now, we're going to get a cube by rotating all of these skull heads so they face the same way. If you press Control, you can grab them, and then when you rotate, you'll pull them with you. We're going to use that later, actually, for a different mechanic as well. They get a lot of mileage out of Control in this game. And it opens up a little door for us.
Yay!
We can go in and get a different kind of cube. You may have noticed the ones we had before were yellow. This one is blue.
About that. We haven't seen something like this before, right?
Not yet. These are called Nega Cubes. You get them for solving puzzles. There are 32... Oh, sorry, not Nega Cube. Anti-Cube. So our little friend says that anti-cubes are much harder to find than regular cubes. That's not entirely my experience, but it is a little harder to solve puzzles than it is just to wander around. Anyway, it turns out I have to use this gate because there's no safe way to get down from here. Oh wait, no, sorry. You can use the invisible platforms. The reason I got confused is there are later things where you do have to use the warping platform. Anyway, there are 32 regular cubes in this game and 32 anti-cubes. Ostensibly, to finish the game, you need to have 32 cubes of any variety. We'll see that later. And I am, in fact, going to be finishing this particular playthrough with 32 cubes. It is really difficult to get all the blue cubes, to be honest. Some of them are puzzles that are so complicated that it's not even like a video game anymore. It's more like reading a book of puzzles and trying to work them out. It's like Sudoku or something. Just really tough, brain-busting puzzles. Many of them mathematics-based, so they're not even that interesting to people who are artistically minded.
Yeah, that seems weird to have on a puzzle platform, but...
It is weird. Phil Fish, I think, was going for a very old-school kind of puzzle sensibility, like the kind you might find in a text adventure. I played a fair number of Infocom games. That's the kind of puzzle they like. Complex math. A lot of these people are computer programmers, so they're really big on math. And Phil Fish, being a game designer, is also, he knows a lot of math. Fez is all about math, really, when you get right down to it. Everything's based on geometry.
I mean, I guess you could say that's true of puzzle platformers in general, though.
I'm not entirely sure about that. There are some that are more artsy.
True.
There are some puzzles in this game that involve music, so in that sense, they are a little bit more artsy. But, music also has sort of a mathematical component to it. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but Pythagoras, who was quite a polymath in the ancient world, also had a theory of music. Because he's the one who discovered that there are geometric ratios to how long a string is to make it play different pitches.
Huh.
He basically discovered the sequence of pitches in a chord. In a key, I should say. So we're heading up to one of the regular queues right now. Here's another one of those, basically, internal doors we need to use. The reason you need to use that is there's no way to leap from one side of that room to the other. There are no platforms on two of its sides, so if you tried to flip over, you would just fall.
I guess. That is really weird, though.
It is. The geometry in this game can be a little confusing to wrap your head around. It gets worse later.
Yeah.
Like that one, it's pretty arbitrary that you need to use that thing, because you could have put a platform there. Later on, there are ones where the geometry of the room itself necessitates using that kind of trick.
Uh-huh.
Here is a bomb. This is the first appearance we've seen of these things. You can pick one up, and then you have to make sure you drop it quickly. And don't kill yourself.
For a second, I thought that was your head. Like, I don't know what it was.
No.
What was going on?
The bomb just has a skull on it.
Yeah, I know. It looked like.
Did you think my head changed into it?
No,
yeah, right.
For some reason, it looked like a face mask before I reoriented myself.
It's because Gomez gets his head kind of squished when he's carrying something.
Uh-huh.
And he's already such a short character that, yeah, he kind of looks like a pumpkin head. It's cute. I like the way Gomez carries stuff.
I think Gomez is a good character design, honestly.
I agree. I came dangerously close to calling him Fez just now.
I think Fez is a pretty cool guy. Because we don't use enough horrifyingly dated memes in this.
Yeah. Well, we haven't used many in this so far.
True.
Anyway. So I've fished out a lot of the stuff in this area so far. But we're going to stay in here for a little while longer. One thing about Fez that I'm sort of ambivalent on is the rooms you go through are very big. You know, there's lots of options in any one area, which I'm glad there's so much content. But at the same time, it might have been nicer if it was a little more channeled, so that so many rooms weren't, 4 or 5 doors in a room. Sometimes it gets very difficult to remember where you're going. There's an area later on where that becomes a serious problem. It's not so much in this one. One thing is that in these early areas, there tend to be separate parts of the room with their own landmarks that tell you where to go in. Later areas are a lot more, how to put it, homogeneous in their design. And so it's hard to tell which level the room you're looking for is on, if it's a multi-tiered room. Actually, even though I said this one is better, I'm already getting lost. This is me going back in the rotating skull room.
Yeah.
For some reason, that just reminded me of Legends of the Hidden Temple. Back to the room of the hidden skull. Then the shrine of the silver monkey. Did you watch that when you were younger?
I don't think I did.
Oh, really? I loved Legends of the Hidden Temple. It was so silly. Basically, it was a game show where the objective was to get through a dungeon full of traps. It was almost like a video game. And also, there were these really creepy guys who would try to catch you while you were running through. And if they did, they'd throw you out, basically. It was one of the weird Nickelodeon game shows from early on in its lifespan. Kind of like Family Double Dare. I don't know why I went back in that door again. That was backwards. Because this is a big area with some doors that we haven't gone in yet. There's a lot of snails in this area. It didn't strike me as weird while I was playing, but it kind of strikes me as weird now. I don't know what snails have to do with graveyards.
That's a good question. What kind of environments do snails usually like?
Wet places. Gardens. Oh, they like wet places. And it's raining. That explains it. Anyway, that door you just saw me go through was a warp door. It took me a while to realize that myself. When you see two squares appear on top of each other and light up yellow, that indicates it's a warp door. Basically, as soon as you've gone past those 2 points on the map, you can go between them. That's one of the shortcuts I mentioned earlier that makes getting around in Fez a little less tedious. Though it's still complicated because it's just a one-way... it's just a single shortcut between two doors. You have to know where they're going. It's kind of like the shortcuts in Clue. They only go between two rooms, you know. There's an inscription on there that I can't read.
For some reason... And I played the board game recently, but I thought of the movie.
Oh, pfft. Well, you know, the movie also does have those shortcuts. It's one sense in which it was authentic.
I guess it does, yeah.
Yeah, it's actually a critical part of the plot.
Which is why, of course, why I forgot it.
It's not that big a part of the plot. I mean... Anywho. So these ghosts appear sometimes. Only at night, I believe, but it's kind of hard to tell what is night in this area. There are also owls later on in the game, like actual living owls, not the stone ones, who will only show up at night in certain areas. And talking to all of them is a puzzle that you get rewarded for. These crows, on the other hand, pretty sure they can't talk. So we've seen several of these treasure chests before. Not sure if you've noticed them, but they work kind of weird in this game. The treasure chests are themselves kind of mini puzzles. You have to work out for each one what room it pertains to, based on physical clues, and then figure out from like the way things are colored or what it shows you, how it's leading you to the treasure, basically. It's not just a buried treasure. Usually they tell you how to get to something in a room that looks like it's inaccessible. And we'll see some rooms pretty soon where there do appear to be treasures that you can't get. But you actually can if you know what you're doing. And the way the game itself tells you that, so you don't have to look it up on the internet, is by giving you the treasure maps. Fez is designed so that you could solve every puzzle without referring to the internet. The thing is, though, that you'd have to do things like code solving.
Yeah.
Which, you know, cryptography is very complicated. I find it interesting as a field, but I don't do it, so...
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to do it. That's one reason we're not going to decipher the language in this. We are going to solve one particular code, which we'll see later. I'll give you a hint. The code that we're going to solve is related to shapes that appear in the sky in this area. Well, that's the only hint I'm giving. Hopefully we're going somewhere after I stop falling to my death. You may have heard our little cube friend say a little while ago that we now have 8 cubes. Every time you get up to, let's see, 4, 8, 16, and 32. No, wait. 4, 8, and 16 are definitely the first several. But every time you get those, you can go to a new area from the main hub. The thing is, though, while you might originally think that means new areas to explore, each of the ones past the first door you go through are small, self-contained areas. None of them are a new map. So, that might be a little disappointing, but... Honestly, this game is so big that if all of them led to new areas, this game would take you 20 hours to finish.
Yeah.
Which for an indie game, you know, a little excessive. This game is probably just about the right length to not make you sick of its mechanics. If it went on longer than it did, I think you could easily find it tedious. So here's a weird little area. There's no soundtrack here, just seagulls talking. The soundtrack in this game is pretty good. I really like the guy who created it. Some areas, though, have very annoying music.
That is kind of true.
That happens in most games, especially, like, retro-styled games. This soundtrack is very chip synth, you know?
8 and... Yeah, that sort of 8 and 16-bit soundtracks can get really annoying if not done well.
Definitely. Anyway, there's a little purple switch that we are not heavy enough to weigh down, so we're going to need to find a way to get to that box and put it on the switch. So here's another little area where you have to, you know, do some rotating around in order to climb to the top of the tower. Very oddly constructed tower.
Although that's relatively normal for Fez.
I guess. It makes it look like the tower was built as one coherent entity, and then large bits of it were just knocked through or destroyed by erosion. Fez's world does look kind of like it's been destroyed. Oh, by the way, this is one of the treasure chests that you need a treasure map to get to. There's no apparent way to get there, but there are, in fact, invisible platforms. that you have no clues to where they are, but it does show you on the treasure map where they are. You could just chance it, it's possible, but I think you need to jump on one, rotate, and then jump again, which means you'd have absolutely no clue where to jump.
Yeah.
It's not like you could just memorize a sequence of steps, because the fact that you rotate once makes it not exponentially, but substantially more complicated. I don't know why that fall didn't kill me. That was quite a fall. Fez's fall mechanics do seem a little inconsistent sometimes. I could be wrong. Maybe it just seems like it is.
Do they seem like you can survive certain heights?
When you shouldn't.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
When you shouldn't, or die.
There we go. And we've opened up a little secret door here. But we're not going to take it, because we have other doors to go through. Really, looking back on it, it would have been sensible to go through that door first, because it is a small self-contained area, and this is moving forward in the area we're in. But, you know, hindsight.
Is 2020.
Yep. I forgot to mention, in addition to the little wooden doors that you can open and go through, there are also these more substantial purple doors, which look like they're made of stone. Those appear to have been made by an ancient civilization, whereas the wooden doors, I believe, are more recent.
Huh.
So in this room there is just a map. And this little weird setup we have where there's two pyramids going towards each other. Like stalactites in a cave or something. And a very curious soundtrack bit that only shows up in rooms like this. Yeah, this area is kind of odd because even though it's very bright and colorful, the lack of music makes it seem a little bit ominous.
I'm not sure if it seems... I guess I could see that. I was going to say it seems more desolate.
Right. There's like nothing here. Except birds. There are a lot of birds in Fez. Of various kinds.
You know that in Fez, a lot of the areas I get... A lot of the areas in Fez give me the impression of being... I mean, we talked about ruins before, but
yeah. Well, the fact that you have these white stones, clearly not natural, with the ivy growing between them, it's clearly some kind of ruin. Someone had to build these towers.
But in the... it seems like... It seems like possibly the aftermath of some kind of catastrophe.
It's entirely possible. I mean, do you remember what happened when we talked to the cube?
Mm-hmm.
Like, the whole world glitched out and blew up. So, I think we have every reason to assume that what we're doing may not actually be that smart.
Yeah.
So I really had kind of a brain freeze here, not realizing I had to go through that doorway. Because we have to jump on this one and then flip. Most of the platforming things in this game, you can actually approach them from one of two different angles. Since if they're close together in one shot, they'll also be the same in the 180 degree version of that. There are some, however, where the geometry is weird enough that there's only one proper angle to get on it. A little unusual. Anyway, I finally decided we've gotten enough orbs. We're going to go back and discover the two new off-the-hub areas that we could get to. One thing you may have noticed is we haven't seen any people since the beginning. The prologue when we were in Gomez's hometown. You would think, given how many people were in that town, that there'd be someone living in the entire rest of the world. But apparently not.
Yeah.
Gives this world a very strange feeling. Kind of reminds me of, have you ever heard of the Chronicles of Prydain? Or Prydain, however you pronounce it. It's what the Black Cauldron was based on. The Disney movie. The first book is called The Book of Three. And then there's, I think, The Black Cauldron is the next one after that. Anyway, it's a fantasy work that's set in a world where there are almost no people. Like a very dystopian kind of future. The main character lives on a farm with one other guy who's older. And there's, like, no one else. He meets a princess at one point and also, like, a little imp, but he never comes across a city or even a village, just a place where other people live. And there are legends, you know, of people in earlier times, but they were all told to the main character by the old man, so it's a very disturbing kind of fantasy setting. I've never liked it all that much. But, you know, Dark Souls is a little bit like that. You know, you have legends of time when things were prosperous, but there are very few people in Dark Souls. Almost anyone who's there is a named character.
Dark Souls, the outlook of many of the characters is rather weak.
Right, that's another reason why it's a little upsetting.
Whereas this actually, I would contrast with that because the people who are there don't seem to have that negative of an outlook.
No, they don't. Although they're very simplistic people, you know. There's no evidence of, like, society happening at all, except for their houses. They don't eat anything, they don't make anything. This would not pass Mr. Beatung's What Do They Eat test, regrettably. But of course, it's Fez, it's a puzzle game. The fact that there is, like, a lore at all is kind of a bonus. So anyway, here's another little puzzle. We need to find a way to get this crate to the top. And as with everything else in this game, we do it by flipping. Gomez can actually jump while he's holding a crate, he just can't jump very far. So you take advantage of that. And it opens a door for us. Where, oddly enough, even though we just solved a puzzle, this is not a puzzle cube, or anti-cube, it's just a regular one. Not entirely sure why it's not, but, I mean, it may just have been a practical thing. They needed to have 32 regular cubes and 32 anti-cubes. I think maybe Phil Fish thought of a few too many puzzles while making this game, and it didn't quite balance out. That's my guess. You can tell from the design of this that, I shouldn't say just Phil Fish, that the people who made this game love puzzles. I don't know how many people worked on Fez, but I do think it's more than just Phil Fish.
True. Well, let's look it up.
Great idea.
Since I'm online.
Since this is such a low-key Let's Play.
Yeah.
Do you think someone's done like an ASMR playthrough of Fez?
Oh, you totally could.
Because Fez is kind of an ASMR game to begin with. I don't know. So here's the waterfall area. One of the stranger areas in the game. There's a code that you need to enter in here to access a pretty substantial amount of content. Oh, and now we've seen some of the consequences of us fooling around with all this stuff. Black holes. Kind of similar to the ideas in Super Paper Mario, which this game has a few connections with.
It was designed by Phil Fish. It was programmed by Renaud Bedard. And, let's see, it began as a collaboration between Canadian indie developers Fish and Sean McGrath.
Interesting. Anyway, so here's the first area we were able to get to by collecting cubes. This one we got to by having 4 cubes. And it's this completely empty place that looks like a village, but like a Stone Age village. And there are these weird hieroglyphs in here. Another weird thing is that the people as depicted here appear to have only one eye. That may indicate that they only lived inside one dimension. There's also the fact that this entire, like, facing, all of the doors in this face in one direction. It has almost no existence in 3D. So maybe these are Flatlanders. You know, maybe the ancestors of our people were in this game were Flatlanders. Here's them worshipping an owl. Yeah, see what I mean? It's completely narrow. Although, funnily enough, the way we get in here is not one-dimensional. It's on the side of the wall. The only thing you can really do here is collect little cubes. There are, I believe, 8 here, enough to make a full cube. But the main reason, I think, for its existence is for lore purposes, to make you wonder about what this world is like. In fact, I'll just spill the beans right now. All of these areas we get to through this are essentially for the purpose of lore. None of them really have mechanics or anything like that. This room's just full of a massive black hole. So that's not fun.
Well, I mean, having things just dedicated to lore is not at all a bad thing.
Not at all. And in fact, by making these other areas simple, they do encourage you to go back to the main, I don't know what to call it, the area where all the gameplay happens, and explore that more thoroughly. Having played the game once, I know what it's like, and a lot of people, I think, through the internet know how Fez kind of works. When you're first playing through this game, you do kind of need to be taught that it's all in that one first area you go to, and you need to explore it thoroughly to get everything. You could easily be forgiven for thinking that it progressed in sort of a level-by-level format, where the first area would be small and the second would grow a little bigger. Excuse me. Anyway, here is the door that you need 8 cubes to get into. This area is clearly 3-dimensional. It kind of resembles our home area. And there's, neon lights and everything in here. The people illustrated here also have 2 eyes, so they're more like us. At the same time, though, their eyes are lower down on their face, so they look kind of like Neanderthals or something. That may be intentional, I don't know.
That is weird.
But this is also clearly like the kind of place that people used to live in a long time ago. This has sort of a steampunk aesthetic to it, like it's old-fashioned industry. I really like this area. I wish there was something a little more complicated about it. It's really simple. By the way, that thing on the top there was a Polytron logo. So there was also a classroom in Gomez's hometown. But this we sort of see people trying to figure out what the world is like. So you have an unfolded cube map showing a globe, which shows that these people have started to understand that there are multiple dimensions. And they're using that knowledge to make a more complicated homeworld.
Yeah.
I always thought this was kind of the coolest aspect of the lore in this game, is the evolution of people in the world. What were you gonna say?
Neon lights giving, looking different depending on what angle you view them from.
Oh, they do? Oh, so they are actually cubical.
Sort of.
Like the world. Yeah. Interesting. I actually never even noticed that. It never occurred to me to look at the lights that much. These lights have letters written on them, so this is also people who have discovered language. And it's roughly the same as the language that Gomez and his people use. By the way, I am pretty sure that your main character is not supposed to find this gobbledygook confusing. It's a case of dramatic irony where your character knows something that you don't. You, the player, have to figure out what this language is like, but I'm pretty sure Gomez understands it. If I'm making that clear. Like, the way culture is depicted in this world, I think that's fairly obvious. I could be wrong, though. Anyway, that is it for this episode. We'll see you next time, everybody. Good night.
Good night, everybody.